Trade Wars Are Class Wars. This fucking 2020 book, which has its own political life separate from even its analysis, but its analysis is also kind of hit and miss. And in fact, in The Rivalry Peril, the book I wrote with Mike Brennes, we cite the shit out of that book as part of like building a theory about China, but we're doing it in a kind of imminent critique kind of way. Like we're not doing it because we think Klein and Pettis are valid in what they're saying and trade wars are class wars. It's because like we know trade wars are class wars is a like language that the technocratic class responds to. And so if we can build a theory of China that is like subversive out of their source material, then it should be undeniable. I mean, that was sort of like the reasoning that we were doing.
Yeah.
But so trade wars are class wars. What's the thing there?
I get into it in my in-game book too. That book, because already a few years, like when I was writing that book was quite influential. But it's a very influential book. You know, like Matt Klein and especially Pettis, the two co-authors. I know, you know, their ideas are taken very seriously in policy circles. Like my understanding is that the Biden people, you know, really latched on to that argument.
Off to it, yeah. Sorry,
fantasized about it. Yeah. No, for real. I mean, and then I mean, in game, you know, I talked about it. Like, I mean, this book basically just it provides a theoretical rationale for the Trumpian like kind of victimization narrative, right? About like the U.S. economy and like how we got here and the macroeconomics of it. And sure enough, you know, it became the kind of part of the policy Bible of the current like policy class in this country, because, you know, the Biden people love it. And I think, you know, the Trump 2 people definitely, I'm fairly certain they don't have many problems with the analysis, because the analysis, you know, as you probably know, basically points the finger, like all the ills of the international regime, and by extension of the international economic regime, we should say, and by extension, the American economy within that regime, are due to the tremendous savings glut, right, built up by excess reliance on exports in a few countries, including Germany, but of course, especially China. You know, the argument is really about China and about the export-led path to development that country took over the last several decades. And so their basic idea that like that created a huge sort of savings glut in China, which then national political leadership was not interested in redistributing to the broader, you know, population, meant that they were going to recycle it internationally, mainly into U.S. Treasury bonds, into basically forms of investment that contribute to the financialization and inequality in the U.S. economy, right? By just pumping those surplus savings into the American economy. And that in turn, right, supposedly the argument goes, like feeds out of control, like credit growth within the American economy, and, you know, feeds this whole loop. And then credit growth means that consumers can buy more products from China. And then, so that's like the whole, you know, kind of loop that they're trying to point out in that book. But, you know, it's very appealing if you're a policymaker in this country, because like it just gives you like an enemy to basically blame most of the country's major economic problems on, and now political problems. And, you know, it's because of this wrongheaded trade policy that the sort of national enemy has been pursuing. You know, everything, the onus is basically just on China, right? Like the U.S. national debt and like the insane deficit spending of this country, right, doesn't have anything to do with like the bloated, you know, military and war budget. Like it doesn't have anything to do with like corporate tax policy. Doesn't have anything to do with like, you know, the ludicrous subsidies that the state, you know, gives to the private sector, to corporations, like all the time with every budget.
It's just Chinese overcapacity, man. That's all it is.
It's like that. So that's this bipartisan appeal. You know, you don't have to think about any of these. You don't have to think about the inconvenient fact that, like, you know, manufacturing output as a percentage of GDP is going down almost for everyone across the board. You know,
it predates China becoming a manufacturing powerhouse too.
Yeah. And now it's affecting China, right? Like deindustrialization is a thing that is happening in China as well. But you don't have to think any of these complex questions. It's just like, okay, overcapacity, done. That's the problem. Yeah. And so I think it's ultimately it ended up having quite a pernicious impact, in the way that it's serving, like as a rationale for some of these trade policies, in a way that I don't know if even the authors intended when they first published it, but maybe so. I don't really know what their intentions were, but in any case, that's the kind of role it's played, and it's really
Yeah.
become kind of like the policy common sense in the U.S. state.
Yeah. Yeah. I watched something like similar happen with the Jake Sullivan crowd leading up to 2020, where they were casting about for like a Democratic Party foreign policy that could distinguish themselves from the Trump administration, which they had tremendous similarities with, but it was a moment where like it was popular to heap nothing but critiques on Trump, foreign policy and
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And so they circled around for reasons of convenience, of opportunism, to the language of like the China shock. And so it's like, oh, the Rust Belt gets deindustrialized. And that's something that China did to us. And it's like
Mm-hmm.
there's so much distortion in that statement, but it becomes
Mm-hmm.
like this intellectual lodestar for what becomes great power competition, and that's the
Mm-hmm.
basis on which we get the $1 trillion fucking war machine, and that is the power matrix that like fucking Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and Anduril and Palantir, like that's what they're plugging into, and that's a big section comprising what MAGA is and helps them propel to power. Peter
Yeah.
Thiel, who funds JD Vance. JD Vance becomes vice president because of this shit, and it's like it's just it makes me feel like almost like a psycho conspiracy theorist with the red yarn across the picture, with all the pictures, and it's all connected because it
Yeah.
actually fucking is. You
It
know?
is. It is. Yeah.
um,
There's every conspiracy theory has a rational basis.
Fuck, man. Yes, and the key is to like constantly, this is the job of the public intellectual in this moment, I feel like, is like give voice to this stuff and explain it in ways that are like manageable or consumable without sounding like a raving fucking lunatic.
Yeah.
because everything is so absurd now. Okay, so that's Klein and Pettis. Trade wars are class wars.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that I thought that they were trying to do with that book that got totally lost. I don't know what you think about this. I thought they were trying to do the John Hobson version theory of imperialism, basically,
They
which
definitely were. Yeah.
which is like basically you have imperialism is the result of domestic inequality, and
Mm-hmm.
China has domestic inequality, so like watch out, they're gonna become imperialist, and in a way they kind of already are, in a way we are kind
Mm-hmm.
of already are,
Mm-hmm.
but like I thought that was like that's an argument worth making kind of thing, but
Mm-hmm.
that kind of fell out totally. um and if it's true for China, it has to be true for America, and you can't have that.
Yeah, the classic Hobson argument. Yeah, is like, demand is too low in the domestic market for your exports, and so the industrial surplus, has to find external markets. You have to, subjugate external markets for your to become sinks for your exports, essentially, right? And that's imperialism for Hobson, basically.
Mhm.
And they were like, yeah, the book is like, so China is doing a Hobson to America, but there was no willingness to see any kind of reciprocal dynamic involved, nor to see any agency of like U.S. Capitalists playing a major role in like forging these connections between the two countries, and how it was. It was a business
It's
calculation. Like they
such
made
an
all these decisions. Like,
exceptionalist view of everything, like flag brain, like it's
no, absolutely,
wild.
yeah.
It's wild how you can analyze a global system of relations in terms of like what one country is doing. Like the whole point is it's relational.